So today we're talking about how a mind-body connection affects our physical health and well-being in life. Obviously there's a symbiotic connection between what we think, what we feel, and how that manifests in life. So let's open up this discussion today.
Let's do it. So how do you define the relationship between the body and the mind?
I define the relationship between the body and the mind as a very holistic one. So one affects the other, and that's what I mean by holistic approach. You can't have one without the other. So what we think ends up manifesting in our bodies, and how our bodies act is how healthy our mind is as well.
How does the way a person tells their life story affect their health?
So the way a person tells their life story, not just outwards to others but to themselves, affects their health in many ways. We can get stuck in patterns of thinking about things from our past which don't let us be fully present, and that affects our potential, our health potential, and our outcomes in our bodies. Obviously more of a neurotic approach of thinking about things, and neuroticism is a way of thinking about the loops that go on in your head that causes blockage energetically within our bodies, and obviously affects our health and well-being as well.
Can illness be influenced by what remains unsaid or acknowledged?
Absolutely. So illness can be affected by what remains unsaid or unacknowledged to ourselves in the way that we can think of repression. So when we don't want to say something because it's uncomfortable, one way or another those discomforts are going to show up in our bodies. First they might start as a backache, from a shoulder ache, carrying the weight of the world on us, to some very serious chronic illnesses later on down the track, like cancer or diabetes. It's the same way where if we don't acknowledge something because it's uncomfortable, we find other ways to comfort ourselves through food, through addictions, and again, we overdo that because we avoid saying things to ourselves, and that comes up as a disbalance in our body.
What role does the unconscious play in physical illness?
So the unconscious plays a big role in physical illness. The unconscious is the ugliest, most repressed side of what we view ourselves. So when we don't bring that up, it can manifest in many ways in physical illness, from acute moments of unconscious behaviour. For example, we can get extremely drunk and our shadow side comes out, which causes us some kind of physical illness, from a really simple hangover to we might do something we regret, to later on down the track deeper problems related to our well-being, such as cancer and other types of diseases, inabilities to speak, and all sorts of things.
How does illness sometimes force people to confront existential questions?
Illness is sometimes the key factor of what pushes people to ask about their existence. That's the existential crisis. But unfortunately, a lot of people have to get ill first to ask themselves, what is life? What is meaningful in my life? What have I avoided in my life? And what could I be doing more with my life? For example, we wait to get ill before asking ourselves a deeper question, or we can ask ourselves questions about a more meaningful, purposeful, driven life, about our existence, and avoid illness. Really, it's just which discomfort do you want first?
How are anxiety and unresolved emotional conflict connected?
Okay, so unresolved emotional conflict and anxiety are connected in the way that it shows up as an energetic signature or symptom within our body. For example, when that's our unconscious self speaking to us that we should be paying more attention in a particular situation rather than avoiding it.
Can anxiety be understood as a signal rather than a disorder?
Absolutely. So anxiety can be seen as a signal rather than a disorder in a very easy way. It's a message from our body saying, hey, take notice because I've repeated this pattern before. And usually it's your central nervous system that comes up, manifesting something, making you feel like, hey, maybe something's not all okay. And that's always a positive chance to look inward rather than calling it a disorder and to look at ourselves negatively because we have anxiety.
What role does fear of loss, control, or uncertainty play in chronic stress?
Oh, yeah. So fear of loss, control, and uncertainty play a role in chronic stress because they are chronic symptoms in the first place that we might have picked up during young developmental ages. That's the word chronic. So chronic is something that's been left unseen for a very long time or learnt for a very long time and then comes as a repeated automatic learnt behaviour within our neural pathways. So a chronic anxiety and disorder can be just seen as something that you've left going on and learnt as a behaviour.
How can the unconscious maintain stress patterns long after the original threat has passed?
So the unconscious can remain as a learned stress pattern through the way that our brains are wired. So once we do something and we learn to just deal with it or learn to mask it in a certain way, we subconsciously repress that. So what that means is that we're no longer thinking about it, but we're acting in a certain way because our brain signals are wired that way. That manifests in our body through our central nervous system, through anxiety and chronic illness, rather than something conscious.
How does modern identity, productivity, performance, comparison contribute to anxiety?
Of course. So we're all social creatures. So modern identity and social status, the way that we view ourselves in society contributes to all of this because we are social creatures. So we obviously look up to others as how to live, how to be comfortable, but we don't really know a deeper way of connecting with ourselves. So we try to copy someone else's way of being rather than learning it for ourselves. So societal factors now in a hyper-connected world through social media and through the way that we can have access to so many people's stories can really help us to either grow or to avoid who we really are and just try to act through comparison.
Is anxiety sometimes a response to living out of alignment with one's values?
Absolutely. So anxiety is always a response to not living the truest version of yourself. It's your body from your subconscious trying to signal discomfort. And that discomfort, again, is an invitation for you to face it rather than avoid it. But unfortunately, we live in a society where we have so many distractions available that we can always avoid that anxiety.
Can stress be a symptom of deeper existential conflict rather than external pressure?
Of course. So stress can be something that's learned as an existential way of being. If we grow up with trauma, with discomfort, especially with things like alcohol, drug abuse from the parents or family violence, we tend to normalize stress. And so that becomes our existential way of being because it's normalized. And again, it's something that we put down into our unconscious as a learned behavior, and until we face it and bring it up consciously, and this is what shadow work and STEO is about, we don't have a language to kind of describe to ourselves what's happening. And so it's discomfort, it's anxiety, it's just a learned behavior.
How do social expectations and economic pressure shape chronic stress?
Social expectations and economic pressures are always a way that we can avoid deeper layers of uncovering ourselves, because we can always think, okay, the number one thing that we can do is work and gain and survive, but sometimes we can make all the progress we want in the world financially and we still make no progress within ourselves. So that's what this deeper layer of shadow work is all about.
Why is anxiety so prevalent in societies that are materially safer than ever?
Okay, so societies are materially safer than ever because we've got things that we can count on: a roof over our heads, jobs, and social networks that we didn't have while we were evolving, and also maybe modern medicine. But through this modern medicine, it can sometimes be a band-aid solution to problems that are acute like anxiety, because facing anxiety is all about a deeper level of speaking to yourself and uncovering truth within yourself, which sometimes modern living just doesn't give you a chance to do. You have to actually want to do that work yourself, because we are still evolving on that front regardless of whatever material comforts we have.
How does isolation intensify stress even when people appear outwardly successful?
So people can appear outwardly successful and still have their stress levels intensified through isolation, because in those periods of isolation, that's usually when the shadow behaviors come up, the addictions, the ruminating thoughts and cycles that we find is only safe and available to do when we're completely isolated. But we tend to avoid the fact that we're all deeply connected. So once again, once you ask yourself those questions and are open to putting them out there, you find a deeper connection not only with yourself, but with the world at large.
How can people learn to work with stress rather than constantly fighting it?
Okay, so people can learn to work with stress rather than constantly fighting it through pushing towards discomfort and taking a moment to reflect. So that might be a physical discomfort, which is also maybe a mental discomfort. So it's taking the time to say, hey, what am I not so comfortable in, rather than going towards those patterns of complete comfort, which aren't ever going to last. Reflecting on how you could face things that are more uncomfortable is always going to help you grow.
If anxiety had a message, what might it be trying to communicate?
That's a really good one. If anxiety had a message, it might try to communicate to us that there's always a point of reflection and inner growth left to do. Growth is what the human experience is all about, and anxiety is just the message from a part of your humanity that there's always room to reflect, there's always room to think about something, especially yourself, deeper, and a chance to strengthen that connection with yourself deeper. And for me, that's a beautiful thing. You know, that's one of the best things we can work on ourselves.